All right, so this presentation will provide you all with kind of a primer on internal test structures and characteristics. And then next week we will move into some more advanced discussions of some of the ideas that are brought to light during this presentation. So, like I said, we're just going to talk about some basic understandings of tests and some psychometric understandings as well. So, as I'm sure you're all well aware, there are different forms of assessment. Uh, this slide lists just a handful of the different types of assessments that are available to educational personnel. So, for standards reference assessments, these are tests that are constructed with the intention of tracking students' progress towards particular predefined learning standards. So something like the Illinois State Standard or the Illinois State Achievement Test or ISAT, something like PARCC, something along those lines. Ecological assessment takes a look at the environments in which students exist. So for most school-age children, there are two primary environments in which they function: the home setting and the school setting. Oftentimes we don't do a lot of assessment that is based in the home, but for some of our younger students, like students in early childhood, that may be an option. And some of the things that take a look for it in regards to ecological assessment is how many folks are in the home? Is it a print-rich environment? Are there books readily available to students? What sort of languages are spoken in the home? What's the primary language? What are some of the nonverbal modes of communication? And then within the school setting, think about the classroom and the general structure of the school. So, for instance, with the classroom, are the desks arranged so teachers can move easily and freely from different areas in the room to different areas of the room? Is the lighting good? Is the temperature comfortable? Are the walls clean and organized, or are they cluttered and disorganized? Uh, and then also, are there schedules posted? Are expectations for classroom functioning posted? Things along those lines. The next one here is CBA. So CBA is curriculum-based assessment, and that really takes a look at an individual student's functioning within the context of their curriculum. So where is the student performing in regards to uh, the expectations of the curriculum, the scope and sequence of the curriculum? What's their performance on the innate tests or the innate assessments that are a part of the curriculum? The next type is CBM. CBM is curriculum-based measurement. And so curriculum-based measurement is and should be a part of CBA. And CBM is really based on kind of a stage theory of learning, in that students move from one skill to another in a fairly linear fashion. Um, and it was designed primarily for basic academic skills in reading, writing, and math. And we'll talk about CBM in a much greater length later on during the course. Dynamic assessment is just that. It's dynamic in that you'll test, do some sort of teaching, and then test again to see how the student responded within that short window or that short introduction of instruction. Portfolio assessments are just that. It's a collection of different permanent products or different work samples um, completed by the student. Portfolio assessment can give you some understanding in terms of a CBA, but portfolio assessments in and of themselves tend to be fairly unreliable as far as inter-rater reliability and test retest sort of measures, and we'll talk about those later on during this presentation. Authentic assessments are those assessments that you measure a student's performance or make some sort of evaluative decision their uh, based on them completing tasks that are generally thought of as being typical of that particular skill. So, for instance, with reading, um, oral reading is something that, regardless of curriculum, children are typically expected to be able to do some sort of oral reading. Task analysis is task analysis involves breaking apart complex skills into the individual discrete components. And so that way you can kind of work backwards from the complex skill to those stepwise skills that you have to master to get to that overarching skill. And that kind of helps focus intervention and instruction. Learning styles is another type of assessment that has waxed and waned as far as popularity is concerned within the educational realm. So part of the reason that it has been derided is because generally it has not shown any sort of like aptitude treatment interaction. So research has researchers have tried to show that, okay, if this student is an auditory learner and we present material primarily to them through auditory means, then their performance on that skill should be substantially increased. And the opposite should also be true, that if they're indicated to be an auditory learner and we present information primarily to them visually, then their performance should decrease. But the research just has not borne that out. And then finally, standardized assessment, which we are all well aware of. And I think it does a disservice to standardized assessment to oftentimes curriculum-based measurement is posed as being diametric to standardized assessment, which just isn't true, because standardized assessment just simply means that the directions are standardized, so the test is administered to everybody in the same way, it's scored in the same way, and everybody responds to the items on the test in a similar manner. So there are two primary considerations of tests that we have to be cognizant of. One, the test characteristics, namely norms, score types, psychometrics, and the structure of the construct that we're measuring. So the theoretical orientation that you take to whatever you're trying to measure is going to influence how you measure that. So for instance, use reading as a prime example. So like I said, reading is CBM is based primarily on a stage-based theory of reading. So it measures discrete skills at specific points in developmental time. So kindergartners are going to get letter naming tasks. It would be inappropriate to ask them to orally read and use that as your primary measure. But if you take more of a constructivist sort of approach to reading, then placing a greater emphasis on oral reading and meaning making that would be in line with that theoretical orientation. So some considerations of tests are the standardization, what sort of score type is used with the test, what type of comparisons are you making, and the psychometric properties of the tests. So remember, with standardization, that has to do with, one, the administration. All the directions are said the same way to each participant. Also, materials are the same for each participant. The test looks the same for each participant. The participants respond in the same way through the same means. And then also the tests are scored in the same way regardless of participant. So this slide is the normal curve, and I'm sure many of you are well versed with the normal curve or the bell curve, and this elucidates some of the score types that are used predominantly with commercially available assessments, be them achievement assessments, intelligence assessments, behavior assessments. So what you're going to come across oftentimes is scaled scores, and scaled scores are going to be used for individual subtests of these assessments, the mean or the average score, the median score too, for scaled scores is a 10, and they've got standard deviation of 3. Standard scores are often what's used on commercially available achievement tests, like the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test, the Kaufman Achievement Batteries, you name it, it's probably going to use a standard score. They're also used with intelligence testing as well. T-scores you're going to see those a lot when it comes to